Welcome back to Zag Talk. Quick turnaround on episodes. Hopefully you had a chance to listen to our Texas review along with some major storylines or major games that have gone on over the past week. We're now checking in with you on Friday, just before our game tonight against Bellarmine. And we have another game on Monday against Central Michigan. And then our big games this next upcoming week, UCLA on Tuesday and Duke on Friday next week, the week of Thanksgiving. So we're gonna in this episode dive a little bit deeper into our preview for both the UCLA and the Duke games. I'm joined by my co-hosts, both of them this time, Brian and Carson. We got a full all three together for the first time in I think 3 episodes. So great to have you guys back. Have everybody back on the podcast. I'll start with you, Brian. UCLA game next Tuesday. What do you got?
Yeah, it's going to be a good one. I mean, look, UCLA is a really good team. I think there's some dispute on how good they actually are. I don't buy that they're just frauds, which is, I think what some people are, some people are trying to make that argument. They played a really, really solid game against Villanova. It seems like they're just a team that sticks around in every single game. And that's primarily driven by Johnny Juzang's ability to somehow figure out a way to make really tough shots when it matters the most. And so in terms of their lineup, there are going to be some familiar faces for Zag fans. They start, I believe, 4 guys that were on the squad last year that we played in the Final Four, including Tiger Campbell, the kind of scrappy point guard with the huge amount of hair on his head, Johnny Juzang, Jaime Jaquez, who is a really, really, I think he's a really good player. He's, I think, maybe the most productive player on both ends of the floor for this UCLA team. Jules Bernard is really good. He kind of is the 4th scorer in the starting lineup, though, but behind the other 3 the other 3 guys that I just mentioned. And then Miles Johnson, the transfer in from Rutgers, who at this point in time has not shown a ton of ability to score the basketball all that well. Granted, he wasn't like a 15 point a game guy at Rutgers either. He was more in the 8 range. Now he's kind of in the 3 points per game range. He's really at this point primarily in there for defense and rim protection. They have a couple of guys off the bench too, including their freshman Peyton Watson. In my view, he's underperformed a bit. I think that he was kind of projected to be in the starting lineup. At least that's my understanding. He's not really a big part of the offense. David Singleton is really the guy who comes off the bench and provides a little bit of a lift. So he's averaging 8 points a game. There are 2 other guys. Jalen Clark, he's a 6'5" sophomore, averages 7 points, 6 rebounds, almost 3 assists off the bench. And then Kenneth Nuba, 6'10". So he's the same size as Miles Johnson. Almost as productive in terms of offense with 2.3 points per game in just 11.5 minutes a game. The big absence from this list is obviously Cody Riley. So Cody Riley sprained his MCL, really, really big loss for this team. And, any Zag fan remembers his performance last year. I mean, he was making just, crazy 17 footers over our defense. And that was not in the game plan. He just happened to knock those down. So, so that's kind of what rounds up the roster. Carson, I mean, what are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? What do you have there?
Yeah, I mean, the guards are the strength. We saw that last year. If you look at where their scoring's coming from this year, obviously Juzang, 21.5 points per game. And then you have Jaime Jaquez at 18 and Jules Bernard, who's gotten off to a great start this year, also averaging 18 points a game. And then, like you mentioned, Tiger Campbell and some spare change off the bench. Like you said, Miles Johnson, not much of a factor offensively. It really is just spreading out the teams and attacking the rim and letting these guys be playmakers. You saw in the Villanova game, really what they were using him for was screening whoever Jaquez or, whoever the big guy was guarding, which normally is him. They're going to screen, get him on a switch, and then they're just going to spread out and let you attack. And that was pretty much their offense for a lot of it. I think, like you had mentioned, that they kind of hang around with teams and they're never truly out of it because of their shooting ability. They don't actually take a lot of threes. I'm looking at their point distribution, and they only shoot 22.5% of their shots from 3-point, from beyond 3-point. And that's 313th in the nation. So they're not shooting a ton. We know the deal with them is a lot of mid-range jumpers, mainly because of Juzang, who's actually, despite, looking good on the stat sheet, his efficiency has been lackluster this year, I would say, especially if you look at the Villanova game. Really struggled in the first half, really high volume guy. He's going to be taking probably 20 plus shots if they're going to be in a game, because they need him to. He struggled a little bit from 3 so far this year, but once he gets cooking and he gets a mid-range shot to fall, you watch out, because he's going to get quite a few going after that, and they're just going to keep going to him. But other than that, at tempo this year, a little bit different than last year, where they were, upper 200s, low 300s, rank wise in terms of tempo. They're actually around 160, 170 this year. So a little bit quicker pace, probably just letting the guards go a little bit. And then obviously, like you mentioned, Cody Riley being out, I think hurts them a little bit offensively from what they can do inside, from a front court standpoint, because Miles Johnson is a defender. He's a great rim protector, not necessarily in terms of athleticism, but he's a big body down there. He's really good at what he does in the paint, but offensively can't step out and hit the shots that Cody Riley can hit, not as athletic and mobile as Cody Riley is. So that's going to be something that they're going to, miss in this game most likely, but he'll be there later. And one thing on the bench with Peyton Watson, we saw he's played a decent amount of minutes in their non-Villanova games, but you could see in that game he's pretty short leash, a little bit like Hunter Salas, where he's just a freak athletically, really good. He's 6'8", super long, has the ability and the talent there. It's just he's still young. He's still making some dumb mistakes on the defensive end and not quite there offensively either, outside of transition and just cuts to the basket. So will be interesting to see how much run he gets in our game. He barely played against Villanova, but if he's doing things well, I think that's something we could see used against some of our length, because one thing that UCLA has that Texas didn't have is decent overall height for their roster. If you look at across the board, besides Tiger Campbell, who's 5'11", their other 3 guards 6'7", 6'7", 6'7", and then 6'10" for Miles Johnson. But they do lack big man depth on the bench. It's pretty much only guards, which is a difference that we'll see between UCLA and Duke. It's kind of the opposite scenario where Duke only has big guys coming off the bench. UCLA really only has guards that are getting any sort of significant minutes. So could be another big game for Timmy in terms of getting it down there. I think this one, a question might be more of the matchups for us on the defensive end, as they run out that 4-guard lineup, and seeing, if we can keep a lineup of Chet and Drew Timmy out on the court at the same time, and deal with their, hyper aggressive attack mode drives.
Yeah, I think one of the other things when it comes to UCLA is their bench guards. Jalen Clark only played 15 minutes in the Villanova game that UCLA won. However, he did have a plus-minus 15 in those 15 minutes. So showed a lot of defensive efforts. I think Cronin put him in with a minute or so to go in the second half, made it back in during overtime as well. Got a couple of defensive stops, tipped out a rebound to Tiger Campbell that ended in a Bernard floater that tied the score, I think, at the end of regulation. Either tie the score or put them up by 2 with a little bit to go. So just a scrappy guy off the bench. I think he's one name we could see a little bit of going up against guys like Hickman and Salas when some bench guys are going at each other a little bit more. But we'll see what the rotation looks like for Gonzaga. Against this UCLA team, do you guys think we're going to see any of Caden Perry or Ben Gregg?
I would be shocked if we saw them in this game, unless there was some sort of foul trouble. I don't think Perry, from a perimeter defense standpoint, I think that would be a switch that would get attacked aggressively. And I kind of think the same thing with Ben Gregg. He might be able to, on the perimeter, move a little bit better, but honestly, I think that would be something that they would attack right away and take advantage of. Their guards are so good at finding mismatches and matchups on the court, and they don't really discriminate against who is getting those opportunities. It's they find it and they attack it. It's a very professional offense in that way.
Yeah, I think we'll stick to that 8-man lineup with Watson obviously being 6th man, Hickman probably, and Hickman and Salas. I think one question could be going into this game, who of the two of them might check in first, Hickman or Salas. Obviously, Salas was not so great against Texas in only 4 minutes, but really balled out against Alcorn State the other day. On the flip side, Hickman played pretty well against Texas. Didn't play bad against Alcorn State, but also wasn't amazing. We'll see how the next couple of games go, and if they're fighting with Bellarmine and Central Michigan now between now and the UCLA game. So we'll see how the two of them kind of compare over the next couple of games. We'll see who gets more minutes, but I think those are going to be the 8 guys we see on the court for any significant minutes in this UCLA game.
What do you guys think about the matchups? I think that's kind of the glaring question in my mind, because UCLA they have 4 guys that play out on the perimeter. Like, Jaime Hawkes, if he has like a smaller defender on him, like he will post up, but for the most part, he plays on the perimeter. Seeing as we are going to start Drew and Chet together, who's going to match up with who? And I think my big question is who's going to match up with Johnny Juzang, because he's a little bit on the taller side. So can we afford to have a smaller defender like Rasheer Bolton on him, or are we going to have to put Strother on him, who has shown that he's maybe not the strongest defensively? Like that's kind of what's going through my mind. I'm curious to hear what you guys have to think about that.
Yeah, this has been, ever since watching that Villanova game, I've been really struggling with how we're going to match up with them defensively. Again, same question for them on us, but yeah, because you throw Strother on Juzang, and then, where are you putting Chet? Because I would assume you're going to put Timmy on Miles Johnson, just, body wise. But then you have Chet guarding Jaime Hawkes or Jules Bernard. Like, he's not going to be on Tiger. So it's really weird. And it's kind of why I think that we're going to see a lot of Anton Watson early and just throughout the game. I think there's going to be very few times in this game, maybe after the first, quick run in the beginning of the game, where we see both Drew Timmy and Chet Holmgren on the court at the same time. I think it's going to be a lot of Watson and one of them, or even throwing one of them and 4 guards, if that's, Hickman coming in or Salas coming in. Hopefully Salas, is a little bit more up to the challenge this game, because I think, like we had just talked about between the two and seeing who's coming in first, I think Salas's body and his defense overall, like his length, works well against this lineup if it's there. His big thing is going to be slowing down offensively, not getting too sped up and turning the ball over, which is something that Hickman does a really good job of in terms of just, generally being pretty poised with the ball and taking care of it. But defensively, he's solid, just doesn't have that length to match up with 3, 6, 7 guys. I don't know if we're going to come out in a zone of some sort. We normally don't throw any sort of a press or zone until Watson comes in, and that first sub is almost when we always go immediately to some sort of press or 1-3-1 for a little bit. But yeah, I mean, it's a great question, because that's a nightmare and it might get exposed really early. And I'd rather not start the game with Juzang, getting really comfortable and getting hot.
From a defensive perspective, do you think there's a chance where we could go big to guard them because of the fact that Watson's such a good defender? You could go any guard combination, but then Watson, Chet, and Timmy, knowing that Watson and Chet both have the ability to move around the floor. I won't say quickly, but pretty well, and are both show that they have great defensive chops in general. Do you think we see that lineup, those 3?
I'd be pretty surprised.
Probably not.
Yeah,
I'd be surprised. I think the reason why, it goes back to matchups. Like Watson, I could see him guarding Johnny Juzang. Like, he's a taller defender. Like he can move his feet decently well, but Juzang shoots mid-range jumpers anyway. We kind of want him to do that anyway. So as long as he can kind of stay in front and force those tough shots, like that's great. But I don't know. I have a hard time seeing that because Jaime Hawkes is quick enough to go by Drew Timmy. For the most part, we want Chet to be around the basket to protect the rim. So I think it might not make sense for this particular game. I think what's going to dictate our defense is actually going to be our offense. Like if Chet is able to do what Drew Timmy did against Texas because he's got a smaller defender on him, then UCLA is going to be they're going to have to be the ones who adjust. Like if we just, because Texas wasn't able to do it, they might have to throw in a second big just to counter Chet's offensive ability. I think that is more the question mark for me. I think if we come out guns a-blazing like we did against Texas, UCLA is going to be the ones to have to adjust. So I don't know. It's really it's really interesting. I think the ideal scenario is if we force Miles Johnson to go off and we force Jules Bernard to make plays. I think if we do those two things, like we're going to be just fine on the defensive end. I mean, Juzang's going to get his. It's just a matter of like, does he score 10 to 12 or does he score 25, 30?
See, even if he's scoring 25 points and he shoots the ball the way he did against Villanova, I'm perfectly fine with that. Like if he's shooting 30%, 40% from the field and taking, quick transition threes, I'd almost rather him take threes than I would him get into his ISO mid-range game, because that's what gets him going. That's his rhythm shot that really sparks him, and he can get really hot from there. So, but yeah, when you're talking about Watson, I think he could, for a couple possessions here and there, plug in and play against, like have a possession against Jaquez or Juzang. But I think if you're letting Juzang go ISO against him, like he's good on the perimeter, but his foot speed is not like a guy like Juzang, I think, would eat Watson up more often than not, just the style of play that he plays. So, but yeah, like you said, Brian, it's going to be really interesting early on in the game, because it's really going to come down to who executes what they do better in the first 3 to 4 minutes. And I think that's going to determine, who caves first in terms of, playing to the other team's strengths. Where, if they come out and Johnny Juzang and Jaquez, score 10 points right off the bat and are hitting everything and we can't stop them, and, maybe we aren't getting it inside very well, or, miss a few early shots, then we're going to be down in a hole early. Whereas if we come out like we did against Texas, that might force them to immediately try to go bigger. But again, without Cody Riley, they don't really have much. Like, I would be really shocked to see Nwuba in early, because he plays like 11 minutes a game. So it's going to be a chess match. Their guards are really, really good, and they have depth. Singleton off the bench really doesn't do much offensively besides just shoot it, but he shoots it really, really well. But Jalen Clark's had a good year. Peyton Watson, if he comes in and does well, that could be another interesting thing, just because he has some of the length. That could be a matchup on Chet that they could try out, just because he has a little bit more length and athleticism to keep up with him.
All right. Well, I mean, any score picks? I mean, how do we think this game's going to go? Dylan, what do you think?
Oh, you went to me first. I was hoping you wouldn't go to me first. I'm going with Gonzaga 82, UCLA 78. We win by 4.
Yeah, I think if there's a game we're going to lose in the non-conference, this is the game. Just because of the matchup issues, it could very easily swing in their favor. Compared to I like our matchups a little bit more in the other games, but still going to go with Gonzaga in this game. And I'm going to go 81 to 72. Because I think if we do win the matchup battle here, that it's going to be, I think we're going to win by a decent margin. I think maybe at the end they can make a push, so maybe it ends up a little closer. But I like, if we execute well and can get out there and work to our advantage, I think they really struggle with our height and our size down low.
I think it's going to be really close, but not in the way the game last year was, where it's back and forth. I think for the last 5 minutes of the game, we're going to be up by 8 to 10 points, and they're going to figure out a way to scratch and claw their way back within 2, kind of as time expires. So my score prediction is 83-81 Zags.
I got a follow up question for you guys. X factor, who, and I mean this from a scoring perspective, who leads us in scoring in this game?
Drew Timmy, probably.
Now I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm curious to know how Andrew Nemhard did last year, like how many points he scored.
That was going to be one of my last like follow up questions here, was just matchup wise. I kind of do like it. I think Tiger Campbell's going to be matched up on Bolton, if I had to guess, and Hickman when he's in. But what we saw Villanova do against him a lot, almost to a fault, like they did it too much, was, just get a guy with Campbell on him. And they were even posting up Juzang and Jaquez, but Juzang and Tiger Campbell especially, because they're not great defenders, especially down in the post. And they would just back him down and go to work. And I could see something like that where we get a dribble handoff in a switch with Tiger Campbell on to Nemhard, and he could go to work on him as long as Campbell doesn't do his little bullshit flop in the post.
I think someone might surprise us this game in terms of who scores the most. I think it could be Nemhard. It could be a guy off the bench. It could be Hunter Salas. Like, I think it's probably a long shot. He might not get enough minutes for that, but if we need him on defense, he's gonna get his opportunities. So I think it'll surprise us. It'll surprise us.
I feel like Dylan's about to say somebody we haven't said yet who might be kind of obvious, but also a surprise. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's I'm on the Chet train for this game. I think there's a chance that we get the Chet that everybody wanted to see against Texas, of like this pure domination. And I think there's a chance that we get that. I think they go to Chet early and often to get him hot, as he hasn't been like going off the last couple of games, not in a bad way, but, just hasn't been shooting that much, to be honest. I think they go to him early. I think he has a mismatch early, most likely, just purely from a height perspective. And I think he's going to shoot over whoever's guarding him. And I think he's going to get hot. I think he's going to score most of his points in the first half. If I had to guess, he's going to be our first half leading scorer. I could see there definitely being a thing where, Timmy gets a bunch of baskets at the end, or we need to start shooting and Nemhard or Bolton or somebody starts scoring at the end and maybe he gets passed up. But I think at halftime, Chet Holmgren will be our leading scorer. And I also think he will finish as our leading scorer.
It really depends on what the matchup is, right? Because if they decide to put Miles Johnson on Chet, then like his ability to spread it out on the perimeter is a good mismatch there. And then like it depends on Timmy too. Like if they're crashing down and just not making him an option, then that gives Chet a lot more opportunity. But one guy we haven't named yet that you might go with, struggled in our last big matchup, was Julian Strawther, only because we just talked about how, Johnny Juzang has not been the greatest defender. That's probably what the matchup is going to be, unless they put Jaime Jaquez on him, which they might from an athleticism standpoint. But if they put Juzang on him, we saw Juzang getting subbed out offense for defense late in a tied game in a top 5 matchup. He's kind of not forgotten about guy offensively, but like you have Nemhard of the guards, and then you have the 2 big guys, and we've seen him. He shot really well last game. It'll be interesting to see what he does these next 2. But he's a guy who has he scores in bunches. I was rewatching Alcorn State game or whatever it was. He scored like 8 points in like a 2-minute span because he can get out in transition. He can hit the 3, and then he's really good at cutting too, just like Salas is. And I think Few was even talking about that they've been having Salas and Strawther watch Joel Ayayi film on timing the cuts and just how effective that can be. And if he's working that and he gets going, like if he's feeling it early, like he could have a really, really big game in an area where I think it's a decent matchup for him relative to maybe some of the other teams.
Maybe this year we'll get death, taxes, and Julian Strawther baseline cuts.
One final note on UCLA that I had down here, which was kind of interesting. We talked about their depth. They've ran 4 guys off the bench that play, more than 10 minutes. And, Singleton, Watson, and Clark are all really good players from a talent perspective. But from a scoring standpoint, 74.4% of their points come from Juzang, Jaquez, Bernard, and Tiger Campbell. And 83% if you add Singleton, their next highest score. And as a reference point, Gonzaga's top 4 scorers account for only 61% of their total points. So something this year that Gonzaga has is just a lot more, spread out scoring ability. It can come from any guy on any night who can go for almost 20. Just going through who we think is going to be the top scorers there. Like there's literally 4 or 5 guys every night who can, go for 20. And it's fairly consistent there. So something to watch for. It will be those 4 guys that carry them offensively, even more so in big games.
So Duke and Gonzaga going on at it on Black Friday. Carson and Brian will both be in attendance along with a ton of other Zag fans down in Vegas. Super exciting matchup of 2 very high-ranked teams. Right now, Gonzaga 1, Duke 7. Both teams undefeated, obviously. Gonzaga getting that tough game on Tuesday, so we'll see if they go into this game undefeated. We all did score predictions, and we think that indeed they will. Duke's got a really good team. We are not being robbed of the Paolo Banchero Chet Holmgren matchup that a lot of people were looking forward to in this game. So,
excuse me, it's now pronounced Banchero because we decided to change that for some reason.
Oh, is that what we're going with now? I haven't heard that one yet.
Apparently since the Kentucky game, now it's Banchero, which I hadn't heard until that game.
Via ESPN announcers or via Paolo himself?
ESPN announcers, and I feel like everybody else has ran with it. And yeah, it's super. Somebody had tweeted, they're like, I like how Duke people just get there and then change the pronunciation of their names. So we're going full Italian pronunciation with Banchero now.
So we got Paolo Banchero averaging 17 points, 8.5 rebounds, and 1.5 steals a game, slotting in at the forward position. The other forward is Wendell Moore, who's a junior, been around at Duke for a little bit longer. He's averaging 15.6 rebounds, 5 assists, and over a steal a game. Both guards also averaging high steal numbers. So Jeremy Roach, starting point guard, averaging 11, 3.5 assists, 3.5 rebounds, 1.5 steals. And Trevor Keels averaging 14 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, and 2.5 steals. Not averaging a ton of steals, but their 7'1" starter at center, Mark Williams, is averaging 2.8 blocks a game alongside 6 points and 3.5 rebounds. So kind of fits into that same role a bit, although a bit bigger than Miles Johnson, of not as much scoring or rebounding, but just really great defense on the inside. There are 3 forwards off the bench, as we talked about. UCLA, very guard heavy off the bench. Duke, a lot more forward heavy off the bench. We got Joey Baker, their 6'6" senior, averaging 8 points. Theo John, a 6'9" grad transfer from Marquette, averaging 2 points, almost 3 rebounds a game. And then the other star freshman, who I think has been outshone a little bit by Paolo, but definitely is a really good player, is AJ Griffin, their 6'6" freshman forward, who's averaging 3 points, 2.5 rebounds a game. So that's the 8-man rotation we will most likely see, pending any type of foul trouble from Duke. Carson or Brian, you guys want to walk us through what this matchup might look like from a stats perspective, weaknesses, strengths, that kind of stuff? Yeah.
So they, like you said, very, very, I don't even know if you want to call it big heavy. I mean, some of their guys off the bench, 6'6" for Joey Baker and AJ Griffin. But, there was just an Athletic article today that came out just talking about how they really don't have a true point guard. It's shared between Jeremy Roach, Trevor Keels, and Wendell Moore, even though Moore in the past has played more on the wing. But they've kind of split it this year. No true go-to ball handler. And it's Duke. You're running positionless basketball is kind of their thing. Very similar with Gonzaga where, we really have 5 guys who can bring the ball up the court at any time. I don't know if they're going to have Mark Williams bring the ball up, but positionless basketball, a lot of, driving and attacking, dribble handoff kind of stuff, just looking for opportunities, reading the defense. That's kind of their MO. They've really struggled to shoot the ball, even more so than Gonzaga early on. The Kentucky game, I think a lot of people saw, they shot really, really poorly, I think in the 20s. And it really hasn't gotten much better than that. Not necessarily that it's coming like that they have one single guy they can go to. Joey Baker off the bench is their highest at 40%. But other than that, it's, low to mid 30s from everybody on the team. But Yeah, they're not going to have a lot of guard depth. It's those three guys really, and that's it. But those are three pretty skilled guards. Jeremy Roach has shot the ball a little bit better recently, and then Trevor Keels, has almost outshone Paulo in a lot of the early games. He's been a stud. We saw it against Kentucky. Pretty much a fullback as a guard, a 6'5" guard. I'm pretty sure he weighs like 20 pounds more than Chet does, and he's 6'5". But he's a stud. They really like to get out and attack the rim. They're really good finishers at the rim. But, similar thing to UCLA, 72% of their scoring comes from the top four guys. Mark Williams, their big guy, also not much of a scorer. He's really there defensively and a shot blocker. And, something that was surprising to me looking through their numbers was that he's only averaging about 17 minutes a game. Joey Baker is actually averaging 20, and he comes off the bench. Really, when you look at the big games that they've had or the closer games, Joey Baker hasn't had a ton of minutes. But yeah, I mean, Mark Williams isn't going to be in there all game long as a shot blocking presence. He's kind of the guy who's getting swapped out a lot because they like those other four guys to get their run. But with that lineup with Banchero and Mark Williams in at the same time, you kind of get a little bit of a look like Timmy and Chet, where you have the tall 7-footer who's a really good rim protector, shot blocker. Obviously, Chet's more skilled offensively. And then you have, a bigger bodied guy. Obviously, different games between Timmy and Banchero, but, skilled offensive players who can carry a team on that end of the floor.
I think this matchup is really interesting because they're kind of good at what we're kind of good at. They shoot the ball from two really, really well. A couple of differences in their offensive kind of schemes, though, and what they're trying to do. We have a much higher or a much better assist to field goal made percentage. I think we're like number 25 in the nation or something. 64% of all buckets we score are assisted, something like that. For them, they're at, like 55. So that's one difference. And then rim protection. In terms of blocks per game or block percentage, they're in the 170s. We're number 5 in the nation. They also they don't get to the line very much, and other teams don't get to the line very much on them, which is also really interesting. I'm not sure what you attribute that to. Are they not not as aggressive as they could be on the offensive end, or defensive end? I mean, do they just I don't know. It's interesting. Like there's some contradictory numbers there, but. What do you think?
My guess, just from watching the way that they attack the rim offensively, is that it might be, and just looking at some of their steal numbers too, that it might be one of those cases where they're almost like hyper aggressive defensively. And so their games tend to be more aggressive as a whole, kind of like a West Virginia thing. Not that they run anything like West Virginia, but the more physical, the more you're fouling in a game, the fewer fouls are actually going to be called. If that makes sense. If you're hacking 7 times on a possession, the chances of all 7 of those being called are very low compared to if you're playing really good, solid defense and not, reaching or hacking a lot. And you finally do, that's probably going to be the one that gets called. And just like they really spread it out, attack the rim hard. They're really good finishers through contact at the rim where it doesn't necessarily look like they're getting hammered on. So my guess is that's probably what plays into the foul rate a little bit. Or, they've just had refs that don't want to call fouls early on.
I think something else that I was curious about coming into this season, and I watched the scrimmage, the blue versus white scrimmage. I mean, it was all Paolo. Like he just crushed it. I mean, it was, there was no question about who was the best player on the floor. I don't think people have been expecting Trevor Keels to be as impactful as he's been. And I think that he's kind of worked his way into that X factor role a little bit. He averages almost 15 points a game. If he's, if he doesn't play very well, sure, Paolo could make up for it with his scoring ability. But at the end of the day, I think that, I don't know. I like this matchup for a few reasons. But I think that it's just interesting that their scoring has come from some maybe unexpected places, for folks who maybe haven't, been paying a ton of attention to Duke basketball. What do you guys think of the Drew Timmy Mark Williams matchup? I think that one's kind of intriguing to me.
I think it's going to be a really good matchup. Like Carson mentioned, Mark Williams isn't playing a ton of minutes. He's only averaging 17. That being said, I do think that we will see higher than his season average in terms of minutes in this game, because he's going to be relied on to be the inside presence to shut down somebody like Timmy, to be able to guard the rim against any sort of Chet Holmgren attack. And he's also shown that he's like a pretty good defender. I mean, he's 7'1", but he's a pretty, I won't call him rangy. He's got decent lateral quickness. He's not a 7'1" lumbering player. So I think it's going to be a really good matchup. I do think Timmy obviously outscores him. Like we said at the top, Mark Williams isn't a scoring center, but I do think he plays really good defense against Timmy, could potentially get Timmy into a little bit of foul trouble, because he does outsize Timmy by a bit. So if they do decide to work the ball inside, get Chet Holmgren away from any sort of post up by Mark Williams, we could see Timmy get bodied a little bit, although he's shown that he's just as strong inside as anybody that has 3 or 4 inches on him, or 2 or 3 inches on him. So a great matchup to look at. I think I'm most excited, though, for the Paolo-Chet matchup. I see Paolo definitely outscoring Chet in terms of total points. I think that's probably not a hot take at all. But I do think it ends up being a really great matchup. And if Chet can keep Paolo under 25 points, I think we win this game.
Yeah, I mean, Paolo is definitely the more polished player offensively at this point, and probably will be throughout the whole entire year. I think I saw somebody the other day, or it was in discussion about Chet against Texas. And it's like, Paolo will never have a game this year where he doesn't score like Chet didn't score in that game, but that's not what they each do. They're very different players. They're very different styles of play. And I'm almost curious to see who matches up with who more, on both sides of the ball, because, I could see Paolo on Timmy a little bit in the post, just from body size, being able to push around and maybe stay in front of him a little bit more, especially if he gets it at the high post. Can also see Mark Williams being able to, stick with Chet a little bit, with the length. And then for us defensively, I struggle to see Timmy guarding Ben Caro for that long. But if he's really backing Chet down in the post, I could see that, being a matchup. And as long as Ben Caro's not, stepping out all the way to the 3-point line and just breaking down Timmy and attacking from there, could totally see him being able to guard him, adequately from 15 feet in. So I think that's going to be a little bit of the chess match there between the front court, because obviously 2 very different styles of players on both teams.
I think that this could potentially, going back to your question on the UCLA game, Dylan, this could potentially be a game where we see Watson, Chet, and Drew on the floor at the same time.
Absolutely.
Just because there's a huge drop off in height differential. I could see Chet clearing out, Timmy clearing out, and we have a potential mismatch inside with Watson. That's definitely a possibility, I think, for this game. It's going to be a good game. That's my hot take. In terms of how we play this game. Obviously we had a clear game plan against Texas. Like it was feeding the post from the top of the key to essentially, avoid the easy double with a post entry pass from the wing, right? How do we play this game? Do we try and somehow get mismatches with ball screens? Do we run high low with Chet and Drew? Like how do we play this game?
I think we're going to see a lot more movement in the Duke game than we've seen, and more similar to what we've seen from Gonzaga over the last couple of years, over Mark Few's, I guess, whole tenure of a lot of movement at the top, looking for mismatches, guys moving across the court, dribble handoffs and or passes from one wing to the other, or from the wing to the top and swinging all the way around. Lots of cutting from the baseline up over a high post player to receive the ball and look down. It's not quite a pick and roll, but setting a screen and then moving to the basket and hopefully trying to get some sort of mismatch there from either Timmy, Watson, or Chet. I think we'll see a lot more of that than we might see in the UCLA game and that we have seen so far this year from this Gonzaga team.
Yeah, I think you'll see a lot of just the classic Gonzaga offense that we've seen over the last few years, where it's, the dribble handoff to start it, and then the bigs coming up, setting a screen. On the other side, when you pass it, you're going to have another guard cutting through backdoor kind of, while the other big is coming to set a screen, and just that continuous ball screen action. Get these young guys on Duke into some of these more complex ball screen and cut actions, try to get them, confused. Obviously, their guards, Roach and Moore are experienced guys. But if you can get Trevor Keels kind of off his game by putting him in a lot of ball screen actions, if he ends up being the guy who's on, I would expect, Nemhard or on Bolton, putting him in those a lot, putting Paolo in those ball screen situations and really opening the court up for attacking the middle of the paint. I think it's going to be one of those situations where you're seeing a lot more classic Gonzaga offense. But yeah, you do it. You do what works. If we're getting it into Timmy and they're not going to send a double, obviously we saw that against Texas. Like, we're going to exploit that all day. But personally, I think this is going to be a big game for Nemhard, just because of that ball screen action. And they have good guards, but I think his experience and his poise off of ball screens is going to be huge in terms of distributing it to other guys on the court and to our bigs. Whether that be what we saw in Texas as a post entry from the top of the key, coming off those screens and just creating offensive opportunities. I think this is a game where he's going to get a lot of ball screen opportunities. And when that's happening, he's bound to have a good game.
Yeah, that's a great point about young guards on defense. Multiple folks have pointed out that like Jalen Suggs was uniquely good at defending ball screens as a freshman. That's extremely rare. Right. And on the Duke roster, they don't have a player shorter than 6'6" who is older than a sophomore. Right. That, excuse me. I lied. Wendell Moore's a junior. He's 6'5". But outside of that, the guys who are coming off the bench, like AJ Griffin, he's young. Right. Like, it's tough to guard multiple ball screens back to back to back over and over again. We kind of saw that in the Kansas game a little bit last year, right? And it kind of got the entire Kansas defense off their game, and ultimately it led to a whole bunch of opportunities for our bigs in dribble handoff situations as well, like with Drew Timmy and Anton Watson attacking the basket last year. So I could see similar action to that this year. I could also see us doing a pretty good job of getting out in transition. What do we know about Duke's transition defense? Is it good?
I do not know about the defense. I know they themselves like to get out in transition. That's one of the staples, just with their guards. Right. But yeah, I'm not sure.
Their opponent's average possession length, it looks like, is above average. So basically they don't want teams to get out in transition. So, but with that said, they probably, I don't know if they've faced a team that has tried to get out in transition. I mean, they did play Kentucky. I don't know how often Kentucky was able to get out in transition, but yeah, I don't know. I'm curious if we are able to do that against Duke.
I'll say I'm glad. Keep going.
I was just going to say, if we are, then I think we run away with it, to be honest.
I'm really glad we have Chet in the middle. Carson, you made a comment about how big Trevor Keels is, and we're going to have to put guards on him this game. The man is 6'4", 221 pounds. That is a big dude to stop for guys like Rasir, Nolan Hickman, Andrew Nemhard, all great defenders, but big dude to get in front of. Him attacking the basket would scare me if it was just Timmy or just Watson inside. But the fact that we're able to have somebody like Chet roam a little bit more and park himself inside and be the intimidator, on top of the fact that Timmy's able to play good, has shown that he's able to play good interior defense this year. I think that's going to be really nice because we're going to be able to deter shots at the rim probably more than we would if we didn't have somebody like Chet.
I think one of the big keys for this game is going to be, obviously, Banchero is going to get his points. I think, even if we match up well against him or do a good job on him, he's still going to get his points. And I'm fine with that. I think the biggest thing is going to be shutting down one or both of Trevor Keels and Wendell Moore Jr. They're the other two guys on the team who really have the ability to go off for a, 20, 30-point game. And we've seen it happen. Well, Trevor Keels, ended up being kind of the star of the Kentucky game. And then Wendell Moore Jr., I'm blanking on which game it was. It might have been the Army game, which they, let Army hang around for quite a while. But he had a really good game. He distributes the ball really well. And I think between the two of them, I'm not as concerned about Jeremy Roach in terms of having a big scoring game. But shutting down one of them completely to where they're just having an off night, you're not letting them get into their spots or get going like a rhythm offensively. I think that's huge because outside of, really those three guys, they don't have somebody else on that team who can go off and really carry a team offensively. So if you're limiting it to just, Banchero doing what he does offensively, and that's all you're really giving up on a consistent basis, and you're making this team shoot threes, like that's great. They shoot 27.2% of their shots from three, which is actually more than UCLA, which was a little surprising. But just numbers wise, they're shooting 33% from three. It's 153rd in the country, which is slightly worse than where we've been. But they struggle. Trevor Keels, it's one of the things with him that he's been really inconsistent with is his 3-point shooting. That's kind of the big, thing that scouts have talked about is if he can get a consistent shot, watch out. And that's why we'll see more variability in his performances. So, if he's having an off shooting night, and then we can, limit Wendell Moore's opportunities to attack from the wing, then I think we're looking pretty good. One thing that I did also talking about 3-point shooting, the 3-point percentage that they give up to opponents is 25.3% right now. And I think that might be a little, not exactly accurate for what we're going to see the rest of the year. We saw the Kentucky game where neither of the teams could hit threes. And, then they're playing Gardner-Webb, who's a really bad offense. They haven't scored more than, I think, like 60 points or 70 points this year. So might be a little bit of that, but something to look out for is how that 3-point line turns out. Cause neither team has shot the ball really well from three. And if they're defending it really well and we're not able to get anything, then that could be a little bit of a struggle, especially in a neutral arena that might be not completely full. I will go 86-80 Gonzaga.
90-80.
I had 88-78. I think Gonzaga pulls away at the end, finishes strong, wins by 10 as well. I think this game will not be as close as the UCLA game.
I would feel more comfortable with that than UCLA, even though my UCLA score was wider. Just like we said with UCLA, end of game situation, like you guys kind of touched on. Never know, even if it is a bigger lead, I think it can end up getting close. But yeah, there's fewer matchup issues, I think, in this game than the other. But because of that, it might be a little more straight up, and you never know. Could be an off night for either team, and we'll see.
I think it'll depend on Paolo, to be honest. Like the number of points that Paolo scores above 30 will be the amount that we lose by. So if he goes off for 40, we're probably losing by 10. That's kind of my assumption. It could be way off. I may have no idea what I'm talking about, but that's kind of my perception and my assumption there.
There you have it, folks. That wraps up our Duke and UCLA previews for Thanksgiving week. We got UCLA on deck, or not on deck. We got two more games between now and UCLA. One tonight, we're recording on Friday. One more on Monday. UCLA also plays Monday, so no necessarily huge disadvantage there with back-to-back games for both teams going into the Tuesday marquee matchup of UCLA and Gonzaga. And then on Friday, Black Friday, we got Duke Gonzaga in Vegas. Look for you boys, minus Dylan. I'll be at home watching the game. But a lot of Zag fans traveling down to Vegas. Super bummed I'm going to miss out. But go Zags.
Go Zags.
Happy Thanksgiving and go Zags.
Happy Thanksgiving.